Yeah, it's a pleasure to have Lloyd here, deputy head teacher, I think for at least the last 4, potentially 5 years. And we're going to explore effective leadership from the start of Lloyd's journey to where he is now in his career. When taking on a leadership role, what should be the priority for your first 100 days in post? Particularly given we're in a United States election year, it's quite a timely way to think about things. And namely, how should we approach our new responsibilities to give us the best chance of success?
Hi, everybody. First of all, thank you very much for having me today. I'm delighted to join you and to be part of this Alta webinar on effective leadership. Hopefully, I can give you some insight here and share some of the things that I've done and perhaps some of the mistakes I've made and what I've learned from doing that as well. So that first question, it's a really good question to start because I think it can be quite daunting, can't it? Coming into a new leadership role, you're stepping in. If you are coming in or you have just stepped into a role now as you started the new academic year, I think it's worth sort of considering your position. Now, I think sort of firstly, it is sort of important to think about the setup you're going into. So whether I'm speaking here to leaders who are within a school currently and have moved up, or leaders who are coming into a new role in a school you don't know. And because I think two of those things, they warrant slightly different perhaps approaches. And I think certainly with coming from a position where you are in a school, you will probably feel like you will want to start making changes immediately because you've been there for probably a bit of time, likely, and you've learned and you understand the mechanics and the dynamics of the school. So I think that's one position that we can be in, isn't it? And then another position is obviously coming in and you don't really know anything about anything. Other than you've gone through the interview process, you've learned about the school through obviously doing your homework and what have you, but you don't really know a place until you know a role until you're in it. So I think what I would really think carefully about is a couple of points I would make in terms of what we need to consider in that first 100 days. So like if you are coming into it, if you're coming into it being in the school already and sort of moving into that role, it's probably going to be the same advice that I would give. The first point will be the same for both roles, in that I would not be looking to instantly try and change things. Like I would be really reticent to go barging in and making your mark straight away, and that's for a few reasons. Like one, we will have a level of enthusiasm at that point of leadership coming into that role, which I think will drive you to want to really crack on and really have the impact that you can deliver. But it's how that's perceived and how that's received as well, almost, is really, really important. So I think really be mindful that when you come in, I think one of the first things, and I learned this as well, is that Matt Swain gave me this really, really good piece of advice, was that you've got to just agree with some things that you disagree with for a bit. And it's a really, really useful piece of advice, because you'll see things you want to be like, want to change that? Nope, don't like that. That's not how I would do it. And you've got to think, okay, that's just got to be for a little bit, because you've got to be able to build trust amongst your colleagues. And they may already trust you. So if you're already in a position in a school and you're already there and you have built trusted colleagues, they've trusted you in the role you were in. There's not necessarily a trust in your new role, and you've got to reestablish a bit of that trust. And I think that's pertinent. I think it's really, really important that you sort of pay heed to that, because it can, if you go in and all guns blazing, you're potentially going to alienate people, make people feel isolated, or sort of not on board with things. So that's my first point, is just go along with things, listen and observe, like really settle into your role for the first couple of months. That's not to say you're doing nothing, of course it's not, but about making big decisions and big changes, as I'll talk about later, probably, like how we make big changes. That's always got to be measured and tempered. So like that's my first bit of advice. Watch things and sort of observe things and go along with things and support them, support those things. So yeah, okay, great. Yeah, yeah. Oh, yeah, great. You don't have to be overtly over the top about it, but you can be, you can be neutral, you can be positive about things, because again, it just builds that trust. And it's not to say like, going to pull the rug from under you sort of under you when the time's right. But how you bring about change and you get buy-in and you build people's trust. Part of that process is people feeling that they feel psychologically safe with you. So I think that's really, really important in the first 100 days. I would say definitely consider that, like that careful sort of approach from both roles. I would also sort of like if you are new to a role, you're new to a school, new to a place, I would be like, or like first thing I did when I came into my we had some significant curriculum change to do in my school, and some of the first thing I did was audit and just sort of and talk to all of the leaders and all of the staff, and just build our rapport with them, and it's almost fact finding. You're finding out what expertise is in your school, like who's really good at things, who's got a real skill set in a certain area, or who's unhappy actually doing what they do as well. That's just as important than finding out people who are perhaps maybe demotivated in what they're doing, and having those conversations to try and unpick some of the barriers and start to find out what you're working with, because you can't go about forging change properly without unpacking some of that stuff. And I think if you do try to just barge past all that and you're not sort of emotionally aware to what's going on in the school as well, I think that can cause issues. I would say that the thing that when I came in, I audited, I did all that. So I got to that position in my first interest. Right, I could see the lay of the land. I knew what the quality of the curriculum was like. I knew we had work to do. I knew we had work to do on teaching and learning. And it was sort of like, right, okay, we need to, at that point, then it's going to feel overwhelming. Like, like there's no getting away from the fact that is going to then feel like an elephant, right? And I think that that's okay, like to feel that feeling. Like I felt it. I know, I'm no doubt other leaders have got into that position and gone, wow, this is big. Like this is a big task. I know Shannon's in the room, and she will have had the same experience when she did her whole PD across the trust. It's like a big. You look at things and you have this sort of instant rush of sort of self doubt and imposter syndrome. You think, oh my gosh, I can't fix this. I can't sort this out. But it's okay. You can and you will fix these things. And you will support development of your staff. Just feel the feels on that, and feel the feels on it, and just really be measured in how you respond to it. Don't let that overwhelm you, because it feels like that for everyone. Like anybody's lying if they come into that and go easy, because 9 times out of 10 you're coming into a leadership position new. Well, you haven't done that position before. That's often the case. It's like, sometimes we take a sideward step in our careers and we go to do things that we're familiar with. That does happen. And sometimes a head will move to a different headship or whatever, and they have mental models to work on. But often, as is the case, I'm sure, like people listening, we're not in that position, and we're going to something new. So don't be, that's okay. Like you haven't got all the answers straight away. You haven't got all the mental models developed in what to do straight away. So just, like I say, observe it. And then when you've got it all the kind of information with you, that's when you start to think how to be strategic. And that's where I would spend the first 100 days working on strategy, working on planning of what, and really strategically planning what the pathway for what you want to change. Because putting that groundwork in before you start doing anything, before you start changing anything, laying the pathway down is so important and pays dividends down the line when you are in the process of enacting that plan, or you're enacting that strategy or that implementation plan, whatever it is. You need to have sort of done some of the kind of big picture thinking before going into it, rather than just going, that bit, we're going to just let's start there, or and just grabbing at bits and starting to fix it. You know, they say about there's that adage, isn't it, about eating the elephant one piece at a time, but you need to know what pieces you're eating. Like I would say that, you need to carefully consider which bits you take, and that will, I'm sure, talk about that, later on. But in that 100 days, I would say that's about establishing that kind of thing. Now, it might be that you're working with a really experienced head teacher or really experienced leadership team who already have a really set plan and who already have clear vision and sort of insight on what they want to do, which is great, and that will really support you as a new leader, to find your feet. But you might not be in that position. You might be in a position where actually you've been employed to make the change, which is often the case. We need a strong person to deliver on curriculum, to deliver on PD, deliver on teaching and learning, or whatever it is. But if you are in that position, that's when I would say perhaps some of this advice may be pertinent to you in terms of like getting yourself mentally prepared to take on what, let's be honest, is often big work, isn't it? And I think when we, that's perhaps another piece of advice around that first 100 days is be generous with the time you set yourself, right? Don't box yourself into a year. Don't box yourself into, we need to get this done by the end of the academic year. No one says anywhere that those things are the time markers in which we have to have done a project by. No one says that. But we naturally have kind of fit into that rhythm because of the neatness of school years and the academic structures. We kind of set ourselves up to be working towards those parameters. We don't have to. It doesn't say anywhere that you have to work within those parameters. So don't, because realistically, when let's look at the private sector, when they do a project, a business project, they'll span that project over 3 years, over 5 years, whatever the time takes, because they don't have the kind of superficial time structures of the school environment. So don't like get hung up on sort of that those sort of superficial pressures, because the thing is, they are there because it would be remiss of me not to sort of acknowledge the fact that those pressures do exist. They do exist because you may be thinking that way. Actually, yeah, let's go long and let's go thin and let's push it outside of those boundaries. But often stakeholders, they like things in a nice neat box. They like things to be tied up by this time point, and so that can be a challenge as a leader to be breaking away from some of that thinking in terms of like, I'm not held to that, and having a clear rationale to explain to stakeholders and other people to go, this is why I'm not doing that, because we don't need to, and B, this is the amount of time this thing is going to take. Now, it's a really hard thing to do. So like, when I just mentioned there about the kind of enormity of something, it's like when you're trying to size something and get the magnitude of the work that you need to do. That's like when I still find that super hard. Even with my implementation planning now, I still find that the most difficult part is like accurately sizing what the work entails, because you can't foresee everything. That you can't foresee all the problems. You try and get ahead of it, but you can't see everything. So knowing how long something will take, you've got to just go with your best bets, work with the team around you, listen, talk to your teachers, talk to your leaders, and really try to formulate a kind of a sort of measured view on how long and how much that this project is going to take, or whatever you need to improve. And then apply what I just said in terms of give it more time than it needs. I would often give more time than it needs, with the flexibility of being able to be like, oh, if we've got this far with this thing, great. Now we know what we're working on next, so we'll move on to that. But all of that all of that stuff will only work if, going back to my sort of second point, if you've been strategic, if you have planned, and if you've sat down and gone, right, what's the pathway? Because if you do that stuff, it allows you to be flexible, and it allows you to be responsive in your leadership. And I think that is a really, really important part, and something I've learned the hard way on that, in terms of rushing things, underestimating how big something was when I started in my first 100 days, and then like plowing on through it, sometimes like to the detriment of other things. Like, we've got to get this done. We've got to get this done. Now, the other thing I would add to that, probably sort of summing up this last point, is you have got to look at where your school is in terms of their journey. So that's the other point to make here, is like, obviously I've said about whether you're coming up within the school or you've come in new. And if you've come in new and the school is potentially in need of quite significant development, I would consider really, really carefully exactly kind of what you need to do first, because sometimes we do need to move a little bit quicker on certain things, like safeguarding. We know we've got to shift on that, and we've got to get systems changed on things like that. And behavior, I would also say, it's a pretty important one. Behavior and safeguarding, kind of, you've got to move at a faster pace with that stuff, because our young people deserve that, and it's really, really, really important to make sure that stuff's statutory and is strong. So make that the priority within your first 100 days. If that's an issue, start there, would be my advice, obviously, before you sort of launch into sort of nice curriculum and teaching and learning development, which is, I love and it's great, but let's not lose sight of the important stuff as well, and making sure that stuff's addressed first and foremost before moving on. So yeah, so sort of summing up, I would say support the stuff that you might not want to support, audit, listen, observe, collect information, and then be strategic and plan. And finally, don't be put off by the size of the job you have to do. We have all been there, and it's okay. You will work it out. You will get there. You will find clarity. Don't let it cloud your judgment.
I think that's a lot of coherence there, because when I think of the first 100 days in the political sense, essentially the politician or the leader is outlining the key policies they're going to act on. But actually, the fact that you're showing that I'm going to spend the first 100 days listening, watching, suggests that this is going to be a long-term thing anyway. And I think you're absolutely right on behavior, because there's no point in trying to improve your teaching and your pedagogy if you haven't got a handle on the pupils that are in your class. It's priority number one. And so I could see that joined up thinking. And I'm pretty sure Sam Friedman, I've got Nick Hart in mind as well, said that humans are typically really bad at estimating how long things will take. And so it makes total sense, teaching and learning curriculum, like you mentioned, they're 3, 4, 5-year journeys to get to the point where you really want them to be. So imagine you've been in a role, well, I suppose you have been in a role for a number of years and made significant gains early on. How do you ensure the school is continually moving forward and progress is sustained, particularly after you're gone? Because we know that progress can sometimes be tied to an individual. I know you've called it the white knight syndrome in the past before, and that used to be a fairly typical model whenever I was sort of learning to become a teacher.
Yeah, something like that, the knight in shining armor effect, or it's something to that extent. Yeah, that whole idea that someone comes in with big ideas, ramroads everything, changes made, and then they leave, and then everything goes with it, and everything crumbles. So I think it's, the noblest thing we can do as leaders is to ensure legacy and ensure longevity in what we do and what we implement. And I think there's a number of ways in which we can ensure that sort of happens. I would say, firstly, you mentioned there, about being a single person or whatever. It's not a single person; it's a team, and I think that's what you've got to keep your mind set clear about that you work as a unit, and that everybody has individual strengths within the team. And lean into those strengths, lean into the skill sets of others. Like I operate on a very kind of, I'm very good at big picture thinking, vision. I know where we want to go. I roughly know how we want to get there, roughly, But the fine detail stuff on the ground, I work with a team of people who are. Jack, my assistant head and Senko, is immaculate at his details and small, and the attention to detail on things is ultimately what makes things run. But then we work really well together, because he says that, that obviously the bigger, knowing where to go, he finds that more challenging in terms of like being able to see the end goal. So it's finding those complements to work with people to have the best team. Now, I will say, and I know Sam's work is renowned, but The Power of Teams by Sam Crone, if you haven't already read or got this book, it is absolutely incredible. I've read it now twice, as you can see here. It's all highlighted and he. I'll just take a quote, like one little quote on this in terms of teams. I'll just read from Sam, like just a little quote that I think embodies exactly what you need to try and foster to ensure that things have longevity. So he says, teams which share high levels of belonging and trust will become more aligned in their purpose, vision, goals, and values. This alignment shapes all future work. The team must be rowing in the same direction. And I think that's it. That's what we're aiming for when we're thinking about our leadership. It's very easy to get caught into what you're doing and my job, and I've got all these things I need to do, and schools are busy and leadership's busy, and we're time poor, right? So we have to be really, really sensible and measured about how we can delegate and how we can use the skills of others to support as a unit, and that everybody understands the goal and everybody understands the culture that we're trying to create together, to ensure that everybody's bought in. Because it, again, like when we started, and I'll speak from experience here, when we started, I very much came into the school with probably more up-to-date curriculum knowledge than perhaps some of my other colleagues. And it was something that in the beginning it was, oh, right, ask Lloyd about curriculum, and whilst that for our ego massaging is fantastic and it feels like, oh yes, I'm the expert here, actually it's about getting beyond your ego and getting beyond that and going, you don't want to be in a position like that. You want to have distributed your knowledge. You want to have like brought the team in with you and learn and be learning from others' expertise as well, and everybody professionally learning together, which is so important, so that when I'm not there or someone isn't there, there's enough expertise around the table to carry whatever project you're doing. Yes, it's strengthened by you being there, of course it is, but I think being in a position where you have ensured that the distribution of knowledge and the distribution of professional learning is effective, that is the stuff that breeds longevity, and if you get those kind of bits right, then you ultimately you're gonna move. Now, what I will say is another sort of key area for ensuring longevity is review, and making sure that your systems around review are strong, because we only get better through review, right? And by looking back at what we've done and going, that's working, that's not really working, or this is, and kind of having a professional discussion with teams and your staff about where they think they are as well. Like, I think that's a really, really important point in terms of staff, because if staff all think, yeah, we're really good at questioning, we're all really, really good at questioning, and what you're seeing is not very good questioning, then you've got to address it, haven't you? Then it's a case of, right, that's not where we think it is. So in terms of stagnation, it can creep in. So we implemented Christopher Such's reading approach several years ago now, probably 3 years ago. We put it to ground, and it's something that has seismically changed reading across the school. But again, we put it in, we did loads of work, we coached, we did, we took a long, slow implementation to get it to ground. but we're now looking at, we need to come back to it, because the fidelity to what you're doing and things slip, right? You know, when you have a focus on something else, keeping all the plates spinning, like you can't, like it stops you from stagnating, because you have to ensure that all these elements of your teaching of your school are working effectively and are working with fidelity to what you say you do on the tin, almost, you know, like we do this, do we, you know? And so I think that side of things in itself is a big job. So when you're trying to implement new things on top of that all the time, as well, again, and sometimes you have to change your reading approach or change your writing approach or whatever, you need to be really careful and measured in your implementation of those things to ensure that all those other things don't slip off and just start to mutate, as you know, as we say, or lethally mutate and turn into something that is quite far away from the initial approach. So I think that getting that team right and getting that culture for review and improvement is really, really important. And I would say the way to do that is by having really strong systems. I think for me, excellent schools are built on excellent systems. And I think if you can get those systems in place, two things happen. One, there's rigor and it supports teachers and yourselves. Like the system will support teachers, because when things are clear and when things have process and when things have review points and when teachers feel supported. Now, there's always a trade-off between autonomy, a teacher autonomy, and having really robust systems in schools. You don't want to stifle your teachers to a point where they've got no professional like space. But you talk to a lot of teachers, in the teachers who are struggling to, like often in schools where they struggle, often the systems aren't there to help them. The systems that remove some of the bureaucratic elements to teaching. And our job as leaders is to ensure that A, our systems are in place, enough of those systems are in place to support our staff, and B, that we review those systems as well, and we make sure those systems are effective and they're working to the best of their ability. Because then when those things are right, those conditions are right, then that's when your staff feel like they want to grow and they will come with you and they feel like they have autonomy and they feel like part of the journey of leadership that you're trying to do as a school. So I would, systems is a big for me. And like, it was something that was a big part of what I did in the last 4 or 5 years at Staplehurst. The systems we've introduced, and that's everything from computer systems, like in terms of like something like a package like Office 365. And a lot of schools have it these days, but not all schools have, you know, and it's interesting, like things like that, communication systems, data systems like Insight, you know, all these things that build around a teacher as a supportive bubble to make sure that they're upright and they feel good and they're not overburdened and they can really concentrate on effective teaching and learning. Then the children benefit, because ultimately that's what we're doing. So yeah, keeping things going is review of those systems, making sure those A, the systems are in place, B, they're reviewed regularly and you sort of reflect on how effective things are, and that you keep things measured. There's always something to do. We can always improve, can't we? And we should be always looking to improve, you know, the Dylan Williams quotes in there. But you know, your core purpose as a leader is to keep driving standards, keep moving forward. And it's okay if we're not like making enormous changes, you know, that's okay. Because if things are working really well, that's great, you know. And I think in our profession as well, some of that mentality needs a bit of amplification, because we're so much of like chase the next thing, you know. Let's just get what we do really, really good and then slowly increase the next thing. And then and that incremental development is what I will say, I guess, is if you have felt improvement, like quick, improvement and you felt significant improvement, that was probably really hard work. That feeling, your natural position is to chase that feeling again and be like, I need the big wins. I need the stakeholder ticks. And you don't. Like, if you've shifted a school seismically, settle yourself into a measured approach of implementation for everybody's sake, including your own, and be okay with steady, gradual improvement. That's ultimately when you do have to move fast, and if there's an inspectorate or whatever, sometimes we do have to just turn the gear up a little bit because we do have to move a bit quicker on things. But once we get to a point where, right, we're good now, we're in a really good position, measure it, slow it down and get it right, because ultimately long and thin, long-term improvement, longevity and lasting success is built on prudence and is built on slow and steady wins the race, because it does. Because your teachers will thank you for it. You thank yourself for it. So you're not burning out. You can't sustain that kind of change, go pressure all the time. And if you try and chase that all the time, you'll end up doing yourself a disservice. So be okay with slow and steady. Be okay with gradual once you've got your skill to a position of strength.
So obviously culture was at the heart of your approach to maintaining success and to continue to move school forward. Is it just the systems, or are there other things that you do to establish that culture, where everyone wants to get better, not because they need to, but because they can?
Yeah, it's exactly that. And I think one of the things that is really, really important for your staff is how you foster professional learning, because that's ultimately how we get better, right? Is through professional learning. Like, we get better by observing other teachers. We get better by accessing excellent sort of initiatives like instructional coaching and things. But we also get a lot better by learning professionally, and the quality of kind of resources available now are fantastic. I mean, Alta for one, they're amongst many other providers, your MPQ providers that provide those qualifications, which I've done my MPQH. My current head did her EL, executive leadership, and we had, I think, 6 other staff on professional qualifications from the Ambition Institute, and that brought a golden thread that created a kind of common language, a shared dialogue around school improvement. And I was skeptical about whether it would have an impact or not. But when you have a concentrated amount of people who are all professionally learning, the power starts to manifest, and you're all of a sudden going, yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. Have you read that? Or, and you bring all of that to your approach, and everything just gets richer. So I think, yes, the system's here. Then that professional learning environment, fostering that, and that, getting people onto, and we're fortunate in the UK, obviously, where last year we've teachers have had access to free MPQs. Now that's slightly changed. There's not quite as much available now, but I would suggest to leaders, like in the appraisal process or whatever, however you do your reviews with staff, is listen and champion staff to gain qualifications and support them to do it. And I think, like, one of the things that people say is, oh, the job's so busy as it is, and I can't take that on board. It's just too much. But as a leader and as a school, carve the time out for people, give them the support that they need to do the learning, and it'll pay back. It'll pay dividends back, because that's often a position for teachers. And I get it. Like, I get it. I understand why people go, oh, I can't take that on as well. There's so much on my plate and stuff. And it's kind of like, Well, I believe you can take it on because you're really intelligent and you're a really smart teacher and you're a smart leader, and I think you can benefit even more from this learning experience. And to do that, you know what, we're going to give you protected time to help you out with that, and we're going to give you 2 days, 3 days when you do your assessment window, and we're going to support you with that. And if you need any help with things, we have a little meeting or whatever, whatever the mechanisms you put in place to support staff to do things like that. Champion professional learning and champion people's pathways, because that's the stuff that grows the culture, that develops people to then have the kind of the motivation, the kind of the get up and go around. Yeah, I'm learning something new and I want to try it. I want to bring this knowledge. I want to try and support my school to be better at what we do. So I really believe that, like, championing professional learning, professional development, and being really like over enthusiastic with staff about them getting onto these things and supporting them with it. That's ultimately how everybody grows. And sometimes that's trickier. You've got somebody who perhaps has been in the profession for a long time, they may feel like they've plateaued a bit, and convincing them is probably going to be more of a challenge, because they probably do have an immense amount of knowledge about the profession as it is. But it's how you lean into them and ask them for advice and get them to buy into learning, and just slowly, even if that starts really, really slowly with just small bits, but how you build someone in like that, and then you start to get more interest and they start to come along, and then everything moves, and we're all at different rates. Some people are chasing after professional learning and they just have got it and are there, and others aren't, and there's a spectrum, isn't it? And it's how then, as a leader, it's your job to manage the spectrum, right? And to like encourage and foster people depending on where they are in their mentality, in their kind of career. That's our job, to go, right, I know they're going to just fly, and they're already flying here. These people, yeah, they're sort of on the fence about doing something. Right, what can we do to help promote that for them? How can we help show them the benefits of professional learning? Because that's it, isn't it? It's like we do with children, don't we? It's like how we show them what success looks like, and kind of like, and get that across to them. So I think, like, you've got to keep pushing that side of things. I also think, like, just coming back to sort of other reasons why, that, like, how we develop culture and how we ensure that that we keep learning, and we keep sort of doing things. I said about not burning out here, but there is a balance between, like, the rate of improvement and kind of it's the balance between the rate of improvement and your prudence. Like, how getting that sweet spot is really important. Like, you need staff to feel like they're still learning, they're getting their teeth into something, but you don't want staff falling off a cliff because they can't manage. And finding that bit in the middle that's our job as leaders. Effective leadership is finding that bit in the middle and going, we're just going to keep moving this dial here and just keep it in that parameter there, because so that we make sure that people always feel a bit like, yeah, we're getting on with things. We're making a difference here. This is getting better. This is getting better, and that staff will tell you. If you ask them, if you level with them and go and talk to them and say, is this working? Do you find this works in class? Do you find that's had an impact on, yeah, we can look at data. Of course we can. But teachers know when things are working or not. They know, they will tell you. So listen to them and adjust accordingly, be responsive in that, in terms of, and then that comes back to what we were saying about when you're planning planning what you want to change with staff, how much and how little and they needs to be constantly adapting and changing and tweaked, so that you keep that steady climb going. We don't stagnate, like I said. You don't have people just falling off because, what's another initiative now that you've moved too fast through things, or you've not done enough. You just feel a bit like we're not really doing anything here. There's that bit in the middle there that we're aiming for, which I can't say here it's this, because it's different in every school, in every context. There is no one answer to that. I suppose what there is the principles there that I said about like finding that spot for your stuff.
I think that's amazing advice. I actually want to be in a school where I can try and instill that kind of enthusiasm, because it sounds like, once teachers get the bug, there's no stopping them. So I think you're spot on. Now, I've got one small question, but if anyone's got questions for Lloyd, we're going to move to that next. So now might be the time to start typing, because sometimes I run out of time when I'm typing my questions, and so that'll give everybody a heads up. But you mentioned mistakes earlier on. If you could start over, is there anything you would do differently?
So, yes and no. I will say what I would do differently. One of the things I would do differently is potentially not give myself as much of a hard time about the continual big changes. Like that, we've just talked about that. It's okay to not, you're doing a good job. It's okay to have not climbed Mount Everest every day. It's okay. That's fine. And I think having had the rush of the initial successes that we had with curriculum change and teaching and learning development, and the pace that we moved at, I was then like, oh, I was tired at the end of that process when we'd moved really, really fast. And I look back, and some stuff I probably would have slowed down on and gone, actually, that we didn't need to have like condensed that so much. And I'm learning that all the time. And it's one of those things now where I look back and, yeah, the rate at which we did some of the early things during the lockdown was probably a bit quick. But then, we were in a position where we had to change. We did have to move. But some stuff probably I would have just given myself less of a hard time on. I also think that like I would have probably looked a little bit more at the implementation guidance from the EF earlier, because that's a sort of, if you haven't seen that guidance, it's recently been updated, and it's at the heart of everything we do in terms of our approach to implementation and how you roll anything and get anything to land. I was on some of the principles from it I was doing. I just hadn't read it properly, and I hadn't really taken on board. And I think part of my professional learning really brought that into focus for me through my MPQH. And it's now honestly an integral part of what we do at Civilus, and how we move and how we implement change. And I think looking back at it, I would have probably employed that a bit more. But fundamentally, you're going to do a good job, and you're doing a good job. It's really easy for us. We're so, as teachers and leaders, we can be so critical of ourselves and so like fixated on getting the next win, getting the next big win and things like that. I think we need sometimes just cut ourselves a bit of slack, and just be like, trust in your skill set, and be like, this is okay. This is moving at an okay rate. So I think I'd probably give myself less of a hard time if I look back with one of the things I would change about my approach to leadership, I think. Yeah.
Easier said than done, because I think, the way I see teaching is that it's very difficult to distinguish between a teacher's personality and their profession. It becomes a part of you because it's so all encompassing. And so actually, I always try to think about how insignificant in the grand scheme of things I actually am, because then I give myself a little bit of a break. Go, okay, haven't destroyed the world. It's fine. Let's try again tomorrow. So I can totally see where you're coming from. But yeah, I think very wise words. It's been absolutely lovely talking to you, Lloyd. We do have a few questions, I think, in the chat. The first one comes from Shannon. How do you manage those difficult conversations with people who aren't on board with the changes, or with people who aren't implementing new changes successfully? And I'm imagining those are two slightly different groups, perhaps dispositionally wise anyway.
It's a really good question from Shannon. Yeah, that's something you're going to face. Like, there's no doubt about it. You're going to face that. Whatever implementation you do, at the beginning of it, just because of the spread of like how people are, you're never going to just get something that everybody's like, this is fantastic. This is 100%. There's always going to be a pocket of people who are like, I'm not sure about that. And it's how you move those people and have those conversations. Build the why. So early on, and with everything you do, explain why. Even to decisions around like if you're changing how lunchtime rotas are happening. Explain why. Like why are the changes being made? Because I often found when people have run into problems, it's because they don't fully understand and they can't see the benefits. And when they understand and see the benefits, they start. I'm not going to say that then they're like, oh, of course, that's it. It's not as neat as that, but something starts to go change within them. They go, okay, well, yeah, I can see that is good. And then you start to then lean into sort of early, like getting them to be involved in the implementation process early. So like part of the EF guidance is it talks about scaling up implementation. So like when if you want to scale up an implementation of, I don't know, a writing approach or whatever, start with these people. Like go and see them and say, look, you're a real expert in this, and I really value your opinion and I really love it. Would you be able to try this out? And if that's okay, I'd love you to give some feedback to staff about it. If you're okay with that, or if not, if you don't feel confident doing that, would I be able to use your feedback with the rest of the staff? Just to, and it's amazing how powerful those kind of approaches are. It's not about like tricking people, but it helps people buy in if they feel like they're part of the journey. We've got to try and get them to feel part of the improvement, right? And you also need to listen to what they have to say as well. Because they let them. So there's a really nice there's a nice piece from MPKH, one of the units I did, about the dialogic process of conversation and how you need to reveal what their barriers are, what they see as problems, and let them say them. Let them say the problems and encourage them to say the problems and say that, we're not here to sort of shut you down. I want to hear it because actually sometimes they may raise something that you've missed. And as a leadership team, they may say something, when we think about doing anything, making any changes or trying to have difficult conversations with them, one of the things we always want to do is try and do pre-mortem thinking, isn't it? What could go, if everything goes completely wrong, what are those things? And try and write everything down that could go epically wrong so that you can go, right, okay, these are the things that we need to mitigate against. They will often come up with something that you've missed and they will say, well, this might go wrong with it. And you think, oh, yeah, it could actually. So then, and if you can work in some of that feedback into what you're doing and go, not talking about fundamentally changing the approach, but if you can listen and think, right, to help mitigate that bit, we've done this, and tell them that, say, look, you raised a really spot on point here. Do you think this would be a good idea to help combat that? That kind of approach. When you're talking to people like that, all of a sudden the psyche's changed, and that slow process of coming round to it happens. You still might get people who, after all of that, still don't want to do it, and I think, then you've just got to keep going. I think that's and they will potentially come a point where capability sneaks in, but ultimately you go through all of those hoops before you get to that point, and you really do try everything you can as a leader. Because I feel if I ever get to that point with staff, I feel part ownership on why I haven't been able to help them understand, So, yeah, I would say try those things maybe if you are coming up against it.
I mean, capability, no matter where you are in the world, we do not have enough teachers for the number of pupils that we have. So, in my opinion, anyone can learn to teach well as long as they want to learn how to teach well, because I wasn't a very good teacher my first year, but I wanted to get better and I did, and it comes down to disposition. And I think, as a system, if we're, like Shannon saying, she really likes how proactive you're being and preempting problems and sort of getting in there, almost not hitting it head on, but taking action to ensure success and to alleviate fears. And if we support our teachers in that way, then we're more likely to keep them, and we're more likely to build really strong sort of base within our own school, and then they'll eventually go into other schools and support them too. Yeah, and Shannon likes explaining the why rather than just being reactive. Yeah, because I think once you're firefighting, it's very difficult to get out of that habit. I think we got time for one final question. Stuart says, looking to the future, what trends or challenges do you think school leaders need to prepare for?
Huge question. Um, oh, blimey. I mean, obviously, depending on the audience here, like there is a contextual element to this in terms of speaking from a UK perspective. Uh, Obviously, we've got a new government, so there's probably going to be some changes for us in terms of curriculum, and we've obviously got some funding stuff that we need to have a look at. But I mean, in terms of moving forward, I think the rate of the thing is with education is there's constantly new ideas, constantly new things. We've got AI on the horizon, haven't we? That is, we know is fundamentally going to be coming more and more into everyday life, and I do think again, it would be remiss of us not to be keeping an eye on that coming down the line and how that's going to have an impact. For me, you'll always need teachers. Like in the smartest AI, we're nowhere near that, and I don't even know if in our lifetimes they'll get to a point where that we're sort of replaced, as you will. But the implications of AI are in the wider surround, like definitely need to be considered. And I know there's an excellent newsletter by a man called Neil Almond that I know has been plugged before. If you haven't checked that out, he does a really excellent AI, sort of all things AI newsletter, which I'm sure we can signpost after to keep abreast with changes there as well. It's really hard to speak globally about changes and challenges to education. I think you're always going to have there'll be lots of persistent problems, isn't it? That's how I describe it in FAQs. The persistent problems of education that you'll never solve, that will always be there. Those things will always carry on, and no matter where you are in the world, you'll still have those things like disadvantage and different aspects, and all those things that you're never going to it's never going to be just fixed. It's going to be persistently addressed. You should get better at addressing it, I guess. So I would say that those things will persist. But for us in the UK, like I say, yeah, some of that falling role as well with the amount of children it's a challenge for us in the UK in terms of that. In terms of the international market, I mean, I don't know. I mean, in terms of all the different systems that sort of exist internationally, I would imagine that one of the persistent problems for perhaps international colleagues would be maybe the turnover of staff, in terms of people coming out to work in international settings for a short amount of time and then leaving, going back to the UK. And that's hard, isn't it, to build longevity in terms of staff. And like some people love the lifestyle and go and move and do that. And then how we manage that turnover of staff perhaps is something that recruitment and turnover. Recruitment's always a challenge. But particularly, I would imagine for international markets, some of that stuff is hard, isn't it? You're growing a new team and you get to a point and then, they've got to a certain point where they're going to go back to the UK now or wherever they've come to teach from, to reestablish their teaching in a different country. So that's hard. That's something that we don't really experience in the UK. So I can imagine perhaps that will be something that will continue to be a challenge. But yeah.
I think you're absolutely spot on with the persistent problems, because it's like the 21st century skills thing. The skills we need in the 21st century are the same skills we needed at the start of the 20th and potentially at the start of the 19th as well. And the issues faced in schools, like I've been fortunate to go to many, many countries over the last couple of years, and it's the same issues, supporting pupils who use English as an additional language, funding, pupil roll numbers, because, I think the swell and fall in pupil numbers it's not just contained within the United Kingdom, so I think that's really helpful advice. Because we're always thinking about the same problems. It's rather than focusing our attention on artificial intelligence, which the good thing about Neil's newsletter is that he doesn't say, "I'm an expert in artificial intelligence. Here's what you should do," because no one's in that position. It's so new that we should be really worried about anyone who says they're an expert in it. Because unless they're a computer scientist or some sort of engineer who's working in Massachusetts and various other places around the world, making those robot dogs, no one really knows a lot. And Neil says that he says, "Look, here's what they've said. Oh, how can we think critically in schools?" And so, yeah, long way of saying I think you're on the money.
Those robot dogs are terrifying, man. Also, I would hate to see a robot dog replacing a therapy dog. Like a reading dog in school. Have a robot reading dog. It's just not the same vibes there.
Not at all. And before we go off on a massive tangent, all I
Yeah,
said to do,
stop that. Yeah, stop us there.
all I said to do is say thank you very much for joining me, Lloyd, and thank you to everyone who joined us today. I really appreciate you giving up your time. Some of you during your holidays, some of you in your maybe first or second week back. But it's been an absolute pleasure, and I'm sure everyone's taken loads away.
Yeah, no, thank you very much for having me. If anybody does have any further questions, I'm at William L. Williams Jones on X and Blue Sky at L. Williams Jones. And I'm sure I can give Kieran my email, lwjones@staplehurst.kent.sch.uk if you want to drop me a question or anything. I'm always happy to try and respond or, signpost you back to some of the excellent products that Alta as well have on their shelf.